My name is Bill Koch, and I want to welcome you all to this webinar this afternoon, co-sponsored by the Tennessee Bar Association and the 9 American Inns of Court in Tennessee. We welcome all of you to what we think will be a provocative and interesting and even inspirational program. We're going to be talking about empowering lawyers as leaders, and we're very fortunate today that we have lawyers and judges who exemplify leadership in the public sphere, and I'm certainly looking forward to their comments and remarks. We owe a great deal of thanks for this program to the presiding judge of the United States District Court for the Middle District of Tennessee, Waverly Crenshaw, who is the wind behind the wings of this program. And Judge Crenshaw got this idea based on one of my final acts as president of the American Inns of Court, when I wrote a message to our 30,000 members in June, urging members of the Inn as lawyers to lead the country in terms of civility and professionalism in the practice of law, and in the type of discussion and debate that we would prefer seeing in the corridors of our courthouses, in our city streets, and elsewhere. And the message that I sent was triggered, of course, by some of the traumatic events of 2020. We've certainly all been experiencing COVID-19. We have certainly listened and participated in some overheated political discourse for the last year or so. And of course, the tragic deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd also gave rise to a shift in tectonic plates with regard to racial equity and justice in the United States. And the message that I sent to the American Inns of Court members were that lawyers in times of crisis in this country have historically stood up, led the way by example, by their acts, by their deeds, to lead the country to a higher level of a higher plateau and to a better level of discourse. My role today is going to be to introduce our two premier speakers, and I am very honored and delighted to do that. Our first speaker today is Senator Lamar Alexander. He is appearing live, not taped. So this is kind of like a Wednesday afternoon live here with this webinar. Many of you are aware of Senator Alexander's what I'll call resume virtues. He's a 2-term governor. He's the former president of the University of Tennessee. He was the Secretary of Education under President George H.W. Bush. He's a 3-term United States Senator. He will be leaving office at the end of this term. He served as chair of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, and he is the author of many meaningful pieces of legislation in his time in the Senate. Now, many of you all know that, but there's some things you may not know about Senator Alexander. He was the governor of American Legion Boys State in 1957. He was a member of the record-setting 440-yard relay team at Vanderbilt. He played trombone in the French Quarter while clerking for Judge John Minor Wisdom on the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. He's an accomplished pianist, and in one of his first attempts to enter into public service as a assistant United States attorney in Chattanooga, he was turned down. He might explain to you why that happened. And when Senator Alexander was running for governor in 1978, he met a gentleman by the name of Lem Omby. Mr. Omby was the last man allowed to live in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And when Senator Alexander met him, he was 94 years old and he was blind. And to start the conversation, the senator said, well, Lem, we haven't had many governors from East Tennessee. And Mr. Ownby responded, we haven't had many that didn't steal either. And then Mr. Ownby added, but I ain't heard nothing on you yet. Well, it's been about 42 years since that conversation. And if Mr. Ownby were around today, I have no doubt that he would say, I still ain't heard nothing bad about you yet. And I hope, Senator, that's a fitting introduction to your remarks. We're delighted you're with us, and the chair is yours.
Thank you, Bill. And as I understand it, you'd like me to make a 4 or 5 minutes of remarks and take some questions. Is that about right?
That's it. That's it.
Okay. Well, first, thanks for the nice introduction. And just to throw it back at you, I think what many of those who don't know about you is that on January 17, 1979, you were working in the State Attorney General's office. State Attorney General was Bill Leach, a self-described yellow dog Democrat who was working with Hal Hardin, the U.S. Attorney, through the afternoon to try to swear me in, a newly elected Republican governor, 3 days early to stop the incumbent governor from selling pardons for cash. And you started the day working for General Hardin, and you ended the day working for me, and became legal counsel to the governor, and later a distinguished appellate judge, and now a dean. So it's good to see you. In trying to think of what to say for 4 or 5 minutes, let me start here. As a boy, I read books. I read about Clarence Darrow and the Scopes trial, and I was fascinated with what he did. I was taken over to the Blount County Courthouse and watched Ray Jenkins defend a murder case, and he would held a bloody wrench up in the air and waved it, and we were all 14 or 15 years old. It was a pretty big deal, but I never thought much about going to law school until I got to be a junior or senior, and I didn't know what to do next. And I applied for a Rhodes Scholarship and got turned down in the finals, and then was selected for a Root Tilden Scholarship at New York University, which was a full ride plus $500 a year and 1 round trip ticket. And so I went to NYU on that scholarship, which according to Dean Arthur Vanderbilt was to attract students with some intelligence and aptitude for the law, but also an interest in public service. He called that practicing law in the grand manner. And it was a wonderful experience for me. I'd never been to New York City before I enrolled in NYU Law School. I'd asked for a roommate who was as different in background from me as possible. One of those roommates turned out to be a skinny Italian kid from New Jersey, to whom I loaned most of my $500 on the first day because he had forgotten his cash to pay for enrollment in the school. And he thought I was a complete rube, that I would trust him with the money, but I just figured he'd pay me back since I loaned it to him. Well, he later became the commissioner of the National Football League. His name was Paul Tagliabue. He helped bring the Titans to Nashville. We owe him a debt of gratitude for that. He even helped bring the new soccer team. So he and I were a part of that. And I thought about practicing law in New York City. I worked for a summer as one of Bobby Kennedy's not interns, but summer law students. There were about 10 of us. In 1963, I guess it was. I heard Martin Luther King make his I Had a Dream speech that year, and worked in Los Angeles for a law firm. But I came back to Tennessee to practice law in the grand manner. And as Bill said, I went to the U.S. Attorney who was in Chattanooga at the time, because I'm from East Tennessee. And I said, I'd like to be a U.S. Attorney, assistant U.S. Attorney, or work here. And Attorney General Kennedy has told us politics doesn't matter. So he said, well, what is your politics? I said, well, I'm a Republican. I'm from East Tennessee. He said, well, we only hire Democrats. I said, but the Attorney General told us to come down here and apply for a job, and that politics didn't matter. He said, well, word hadn't gotten to me yet. So that was my first job interview in Tennessee for the law. Now, jumping way ahead, I've been asked, what does law practice have to do with serving in government? What do you learn there that is useful? Well, one thing you learn in law school is to look at a mass of information and sort out the essence of it. And that's very helpful when you're a United States Senator. I mean, I'm expected to know something about everything from COVID to Iran, and much of it's very complicated. And I have to rely on other people to help me understand it. But being able to sort through a mass of information and focus on the essence is one thing you learn in law school. Another thing you learn in law school is discipline and work. That helps. Another thing you learn is how to write and speak clearly. And a big part of leadership, whether you're governor or senator, is you see an urgent need, you develop a strategy to meet the need, and then you try to persuade at least half the people you're right. And I have lots of young people that come in, apply for jobs here. They can't write a declarative sentence. They're not very good at persuading you that what they're saying is compelling to you. And so that's a real skill, and we spend a lot of time on it. You learn that in law school, particularly I did on the law review at NYU. And then if you're making laws, it helps to know what a law is. So I think there are a lot of advantages to being a United States senator who's trained in the law. We don't have as many as we once did. 55 senators, about half of us are lawyers. Some of them are leaders of the Senate, like Mitch McConnell on the Republican side and Dick Durbin on the Democratic side. But lawyers play a very important role in our government. I was interviewed for the NYU alumni magazine, and they asked me if I had any hope, and I said for advice for the students who were there today, and I said, yeah, I did. I hoped that more of them would become interested in serving in government rather than just suing the government. Now, suing the government can be a noble thing. We know that. But serving the government, I would say, can be even more noble and takes even more talented people. And we need those people to help make sure that we develop vaccines on time, to deal with intelligence matters and national defense matters, to fix No Child Left Behind, to improve the national parks. All these are complicated issues, and having intelligent people with a broad understanding of the law in the country who are willing to come either into the Senate or the City Council or whatever form of public service is even more important today. So even though there are fewer lawyers today in the United States Senate than there used to be, I still believe it's a terrific background and training, and it's been a great privilege for me to be here. Now, Bill, I'll be glad to take questions if you have them. Bill, you're on mute still.
I'm a little bit cyber celibate, but I think I'm back now.
Now you're back.
I wanted to make sure the participants knew that we have a chat function, and you're welcome to send in questions over the chat, which I will then relay. But I have a few questions to start with. And of course, we're seeing not only on the national level, but on the state level as well, the fewer and fewer lawyers are getting into the public arena. Why do you think that is?
Well, I guess we just have a broader and more diverse country. I'd have to think about that for a little bit. It used to be men lawyers, and now we have, for example, lots of women in the United States Senate. Maybe about a quarter of them are a quarter of the senators are women, and most of them are not lawyers. They've been teachers or business women or a whole variety of things. So I think we just have a more diverse society, in a sense, more democratic society, and the Senate looks more like the rest of the country.
And there are different leadership styles. You know, some people lead from the front, some people lead from the rear. And I know that mentoring is a very important way that people develop the skills that they're going to have as a lawyer or as a public servant. And I know that one of your mentors was Senator Howard Baker. Could you talk a little bit about some of the lessons you learned from how Senator Baker approached things. Of course, he was also a lawyer.
He was a good lawyer. He was a very effective lawyer, practiced for maybe 10, 12 years before he was elected to the Senate. I'm going to make my farewell address tomorrow at 10:30 Eastern Time in the Senate, and I'm going to tell some stories, including this one. Howard Baker made his maiden address on March the 9th, 1967 in the United States Senate. That's his first speech on the floor of the Senate. And he spoke for too long. And afterwards, the Republican leader of the Senate, who was also his father-in-law, Everett M. Dirksen, came over to him and said, Howard, perhaps you should occasionally enjoy the luxury of an unexpressed thought. I think enjoying the luxury of an unexpressed thought is pretty good advice for a lot of us. Howard Baker also thought that the essence of being a good senator was being an eloquent listener. And I think what he meant by that was that often what people are saying to you is not what they mean. And you have to listen very carefully to what they're saying to understand what they really mean. And you also, if you're trying to get a result in a body of 100 that mainly operates by unanimous consent, where you have to get 60 votes to cut off debate before you can vote on a major issue, you have to recognize the other fellow might be right. And you have to include in whatever your result is, some of the ideas that others have with which you might not entirely agree. Now, some people don't like to do that. They like just come up here and talk and state their position. I think that's a big waste of time. I mean, if all you want to do is state your position, you could stay back in Tennessee and get a soapbox or a radio show and do that. But it's hard to get in the United States Senate. It's hard to stay here. And while you're here, my view is you ought to try to accomplish something good for the country. And that means get a result.
And speaking of results, one of our participants has asked this question. Senator Alexander, what achievements from your leadership of the Help Committee are you most proud of?
Well, let me qualify that. Being governor is a lot like being Moses. You say, let's go this way, and then you lay out, you say, we need better schools, here's a better schools program, and you try to persuade half the people you're right. You do the same thing as senator, except you're not like Moses. It's more like being a parade organizer. And so you pick out the subject, but you recruit the marchers and pick out the music and select the route. You may even pick another drum major, and then you walk in the middle of the parade to make sure it doesn't march into the ditch, which it'll do about every 2 or 3 days. That's how you get things done in the Senate. And 2 or 3 of the best examples of that were fixing No Child Left Behind. There was 100 alligators in that swamp. President Obama called it a Christmas miracle when it was passed. And the Wall Street Journal said that it transferred more power from Washington back to the states than anything in 25 years. And the other one is 21st Century Cures, which was also hard to pass. And Mitch McConnell said it was the most important bill of 2016. And what it did was move medical miracles into doctors' offices more rapidly. And the authority and the money that we provided there has played a big role in the record-setting development of treatments and vaccines that's occurring this year for COVID. So those are 2. One that's really close to my heart is simplifying the Fafsa. Now, a lot of you won't know what that is, but if you do know what it is, you'll know exactly what I mean. 400,000 Tennessee families fill it out every year to get federal aid for education. It's 108 questions. Most of them are unnecessary, and it discourages lots of students from going to college or even getting the 2 years of free college that Tennessee offers. And we've gotten halfway through in simplifying that, and I hope before the end of the year we get that down to 30 questions or so instead of 108.
Well, now, and certainly you'd put on your list the recent bill to help the Park Service fix up its facilities and
Yeah, that wasn't, yeah, I would. That's not on my committee, and that's close to my heart too, that and the songwriters law. We changed the copyright laws so songwriters get paid a fair amount for the money they write, the music they write. The songwriters tell me that they're already seeing an effect from that. most of the songs are being played over the internet. They just weren't getting paid. And I think we've gone a long way toward fixing that. And then the bill you were talking about is the Great American Outdoors Act. And good people have been trying to pass the provisions of it since literally the Eisenhower years. But what it will do is eliminate half the deferred maintenance in our 417 national parks, from the Smokies to the Pearl Harbor Visitor Center, and make them places where we really want to go and not find a leaky roof or a sewage system that doesn't work or a trail that has holes in it. And the other thing it does is permanently fund the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which funds a lot of the city parks and places like Rocky Fork in Upper East Tennessee, where the governor just created a new state park with money that we've gotten as a part of that program. So the Great American Outdoors Act is important for the Tennessee Wildlife Refuge in West Tennessee, for Chickamauga Park in Chattanooga, for the Cherokee National Forest and the Smokies. It's a really big deal. And literally everybody agrees it's the most important conservation and outdoor recreation law in 50 years.
Back when you and I were serving together in the state capitol, I remember the early morning meetings where we would sit around and talk about, is this story going to break on Tennessean time or on Banner time? And, you know, the communications that public officials, the channels that they had between them and the public were fairly static. Now they're very fluid and robust. There are all kinds of ways to communicate. And one of our listeners has asked this question. He says, I recently watched a rerun of President Obama in an episode of comedian Jerry Seinfeld's program on Driving for Coffee with Comedians. How do you see developments in new means and avenues for leaders to communicate to their public?
Well, I think President Trump's taught everybody in public life a lesson on that. I mean, he wakes up in the morning and puts out about 30 tweets, and 72 million people see it instantly. I mean, nobody's ever done that before. And we now live in what I would call an internet democracy. I gave away my phone a minute ago. Here it is. But you know, this thing was invented. This was invented in 2008. We didn't have the iPhone before 2008, and look at the difference it's made. I mean, people spend hours a day on it. President Lincoln, if he got mad and wrote a hot letter, his practice was to put it in the drawer for 30 days, and then he'd forget it. If the current president gets mad, his practice is pick this up, tweet it out, 72 million people get it, and send it to 72 million people more. So the environment in which we live pushes us apart, creates a difficult situation for people in the United States Senate, because we represent the environment in which we live, and we're constantly being pushed to the extremes. And for those who are working in the middle, which means to me, let's get a result on fixing No Child Left Behind. I mean, if you want rid of the Common Core mandate, you got to get a result. If you want to fix the national parks, you got to get a result. If you want the songwriters to be paid, you got to get a result. And if you do that, you got to work with people in the other party and agree on something. And the internet democracy we have today makes that harder.
Do you think there's a remedy to that?
I think the remedy is probably like what my 15-year-old granddaughter is doing this semester. She went to an outdoor school in North Carolina for a semester, for her first semester of her sophomore year, and they don't allow any technology. So she's actually living without the internet and writing letters on paper the way her grandmother used to do. I think we're going to have to learn to put the iPhone down or put it in its proper place. We learn to live with television. We learn to live with radio. We're going to have to learn to live with the internet.
Over time, it seems as if whether it's technology or other forces have pulled people apart rather than together. It used to be, I think you were involved in them when you were in Washington as a younger person, where there would be softball teams and softball games between various Senate chambers and House chambers, and people would go out and have a beer afterward. They lived in Washington, so their kids went to the same school. They knew each other. There was socializing going on there. That all seems to have been significantly decreased over the last several decades. Is that contributing to this separateness between the parties and the inability to get to the middle?
Well, the fact that everybody goes home for the weekend does, but a lot still goes on. Tonight, 6:30, I'm going to a dinner over in the Capitol for about 8 or 10 senators, Democrats and Republicans, who work together to pass the Great American Outdoors Act. And I go to Ford Theater with Angus King as my date when he's not here. I mean, he's an independent senator from Maine. So there's a lot of congeniality, a lot of socializing. It's when you get down to making a law that the environment in which we live makes it more difficult.
One of the listeners has asked this question, and I'll just read it. It says, would you describe the Senate as dysfunctional? And if so, what's it going to take to get it back to regular order?
No, I wouldn't describe it as dysfunctional. I would describe it as not reaching its full potential. I mean, you could, some people say, let's get rid of the filibuster. And, you could do that. Then you could pass everything by majority vote. So Democrats are in, you repeal Tennessee's right to work law and all the right to work laws in the country. And Republicans get in, you repeal all the, you repeal all the open shop laws, or you do the same on pro-life, or you do the same on guns, or you go back and forth and back and forth. The Senate is deliberately designed to take a while to create a bipartisan result or a broad agreement on complex issues like civil rights or education or the outdoors or medical miracles that most of us can vote for and the country will accept. I mean, way back in 1968, Lyndon Johnson and Everett Dirksen worked out the 1968 Civil Rights Bill, and they had to, at that time, get 67 votes to overcome a filibuster. But once they got it, all those who voted no went home and said, it's the law, we have to support it, and the country did. Now, that may not seem so important today looking back, but in 1968, that was very controversial to do, and they came up with a broad agreement that the senators could support and that the country could accept. That's what the Senate is for, to force those broad agreements. And if you're a body of 100 that operates by unanimous consent, you're by definition going to be a little bit dysfunctional.
Where our time is drawing to an end, and I know we have a number of aspiring leaders that are in your audience today, and if you had any final words of encouragement, advice for them on what they ought to do to fulfill their desire to step up and be more of a servant leader, what would you suggest?
Well, first, I would encourage them. I'm as I said, I'm making my farewell address on the Senate floor tomorrow, and that's after having had what I would consider to be the best seat in the House for the last 50 years in terms of public life, or one of the best. It's just, my last line of my speech is, I would like for everybody to know that it's been a real privilege to be a United States Senator, and it was a real privilege to be the governor of Tennessee. So I would hope that there are others who would aspire to that, or to be on the school board, or to be the mayor, or whatever. Having a chance to improve the schools, fix up the parks, develop a vaccine. Was in Cott County with the governor yesterday, and we're starting 75 miles of mountain bike trails in Cott County to try to attract a lot more visitors through Cott County, which is one of our depressed counties. I feel like almost every day when I get up, I have a chance to do something good for the country, and I go to bed at night thinking I have. So first, I want to encourage you. Second, have a sense of purpose. Don't worry about whether you can be elected or not. You never know. You might win, you might lose. Just have a sense of purpose. And three, to get started, find a mentor or two. Pick somebody whom you admire, volunteer to work for them, do anything they ask you to do that's legal, and learn what they do wrong and what they do right. I had the privilege of working for Judge John Minor Wisdom in New Orleans, great judge, formerly a Republican activist in New Orleans. He ordered James Meredith to be admitted to Ole Miss. I worked for Howard Baker, who taught me everything about the United States Senate and a lot about politics. And then the White House, I worked for a man named Bryce Harlow, who had been President Eisenhower's favorite staff member and who was widely regarded as perhaps the most respected congressional relations person in Washington, D.C. So I got my PhD in politics and government from those three men before I ever ran for anything, and I'm glad that I did.
Well, let me thank you again, Senator, for joining us today. And I know that another person that affected your life a great deal was Alex Haley. And we all know that one of the things that he left with us was the saying, find the good and praise it. And I would say it's not that difficult to find the good about you. And we thank you and praise you for the contributions you've made to the state and the country. And we appreciate your spending time with us this afternoon.
Thanks, Dean Koch, and it's been a real privilege.
Great. Thank you. Are we ready to introduce Judge Donald? I believe we are. Well, it is my pleasure to introduce you all who are listening today to Judge Bernice Donald of the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. You have some biographical information of all the speakers and presenters today, and I'm not going to dwell a great deal on what I'll call Judge Donald's resume values. She's a graduate. She has her undergraduate and law degrees from Memphis State, and I'm of an age where I can still call the University of Memphis, Memphis State. She has an LLM in judicial studies from the Duke University School of Law. Early in her career, she worked for Memphis Area Legal Services and as an assistant public defender. She came to the bench in 1982 as a member of the Shelby County Criminal General Sessions Court. And for the last 38 years, she has served on that court. She served as a bankruptcy judge in the Western District of Tennessee. She was nominated and confirmed to the United States District Court for the Western District of Tennessee in 1995. 15 years later, President Obama nominated her for a seat on the Sixth Circuit, and she was confirmed in 2011 by a 96-2 vote, confirmation vote, the likes of which we haven't seen lately. In his remarks on the Senate floor in 2011 supporting Justice Donald's confirmation, Senator Alexander noted that her life has been full of education and service and achievement, and that it is a testimonial to the success of Dr. King's movement and the kind of leadership he inspired. Justice Donald has been extremely active in the American, Tennessee, and Memphis Bar Associations and in the National Association of Women Judges. Her leadership roles there have included secretary to the American Bar Association and president of the National Association of Women Judges. She has received literally hundreds of recognitions and awards, but just a few months ago, Judge Donald received the inaugural Lifetime Liberty Achievement Award from the ABA's Tort Trial and Insurance Practice section. But let me end my introduction not with Judge Donald's resume virtues, but with what David Brooks calls her eulogy virtues: her kindness, her bravery, her honesty, and her faithfulness. Judge Donald's mother taught her that she should never be afraid to stand alone. Her mother also taught her that you are as good as anyone else and you are no better than anyone else. Judge Donald listened to her mother and epitomizes the virtues of bravery, honesty, and kindness. And so it should also come as no surprise that Judge Donald's motto is, quote, "Each day is a gift from God. The service we render is our gift to God." Judge Donald, thank you for joining us today, and we're looking forward to your remarks.
Thank you, Dean Koch. Thank you, Tennessee Bar Association and the American Inns of Court for putting on this great program. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to listen to Senator Alexander, who introduced me on the Senate floor for this position. I learned something this afternoon that he and I have in common, having run track. And I think he ran the fourth leg of the 440 relay, and I ran the second leg. So I'll have to mention that to him the next time I talk to him. You know, there's a saying that goes something like this: lost yesterday, someplace between sunrise and sunset. 2 golden hours, each set with 60 diamond-studded minutes. No reward is offered, for they are gone forever. It speaks to the importance and the value of time. And I know that our time this afternoon is short and it's valuable. So I'm going to get right into it after I thank Ms. Vossler for her assistance this afternoon in getting me through this slide. We're going to move briskly. We're going to have some interaction and some things we're going to touch and move. But I was invited this afternoon, and I want to thank Judge Crenshaw for inviting me to talk about implicit bias, something I talk about a lot because our world is increasingly pluralistic. And I think it's important that we understand the concepts and we understand what it is and what it is not. I just want to say that there are 3 powerful interconnected forces that have been shaping and reshaping the way we practice law in the United States over the past 4 decades. Those are technology, globalization, and diversity. And my talk about ferreting out implicit and explicit bias really relates to that diversity that we are experiencing and increasing day by day. So we're going to get started with the objectives. Jennifer, next slide. So we have as an objective today looking at the possibility and the presence of implicit bias from intake through trial. And I'm going to talk about, in the final analysis, some rooting out of implicit bias. Go to the next one. What is implicit bias? Implicit bias is attitudes or stereotypes that affect decision-making. It affects our understanding and our behavior without our even realizing it. It is deeply embedded in our psyche and ourselves, and sometimes it's in direct contradiction to those values that we explicitly hold or believe. Now, I want to ask the first poll question. Do you believe that nearly everyone has implicit biases? Answer yes or no quickly, and then we'll move. Okay. Jennifer, let's close the polling and see what we have. So you said 97%, and that is correct. We all have these biases, whether we believe it or not. And if we think about it, and we don't think about it in the negative or in racial constructs, think about today, wherever you are, you came into a space, you likely pulled out an object and sat down. Some of you sat in a chair that had arms. Some of you sat in a chair that didn't. Some of you sat in chairs that have rollers. Some have 4 legs, whatever. You don't have to go back and think about what you were doing or analyze it. You know, because of your experience and accumulated knowledge, that that's a chair, and you know what you do with that. We have also embedded attitudes and stereotypes about people. So go to the next slide, Jennifer. And sometimes these attitudes we have can be manifested in a very negative way. I want you to look at the image before you. It asks the question, what does a convicted felon look like? Many of us believe we know. If you look at this image and you didn't know these two people, most of you would think there must be a convicted felon in the picture, or why is she showing that? Most of us would not select Martha Stewart as the convicted felon because she does not look like our image of what a convicted felon would look like. Let me show you how that plays out in real life. I was presiding over a trial as a district court judge. It was a drug trial, and I had done my voir dire, the prosecutor did his, and then the defense attorney walked up and asked the venire the question, how many of you know what a drug dealer looks like? Raise your hand. Every hand in the venire, every hand in the box went up. And she stopped, the defense attorney. And as people realized what they were saying by their actions, you could see their hands slowly come down, because seated over at the defense table was a young African-American male who looked like he stepped right out of central casting for the role of drug dealer. Now that has a lot of implications, because as I would tell you, none of us know what a drug dealer looks like. None of us know what a convicted felon looks like. There is no singular image that says, if people fit these criteria, they must be a convicted felon. But we have those embedded notions. And I give you these stories to ask you to guard against believing that you can easily allocate based on physical characteristics who is and who is not a criminal. Next slide, Jennifer. So next question. How many of you have taken an IAT test? And I say an IAT, an implicit association test, because there is no singular test. So let's answer that question very quickly, and then we'll keep going. Okay, close the polling, Jennifer. All right, so very few of you have taken that, and I'm going to encourage you to take it. The IAT is an association test. It's premised on the notion that we can more quickly associate negative words with people whom who are in our out group, and we can more quickly associate positive words with people who are in our in group. For example, we could more easily associate white with positive words, and more easily associate African American or Black with negative words. And that, according to the inventors, tells us something about our level of bias. There's a lot of research on this topic. There's also a lot of controversy that has been developed lately about how accurate those tests are and whether they can be used broadly to speak to levels of implicit biases in groups. But it is an association test. There are tests for race, for gender, for age, weight, religion, and a whole range of things. You can find that test on the computer under IAT, or implicit association test. Your results are anonymous. You can only share those if you want to, but nobody else knows or can go back and associate your test results with you. So I won't say more about that, but keep going, Jennifer, to the next slide. And move forward one more. So I want to get to this about how some of the science, some of the studies that have been done about implicit bias, just to flesh out these notions that I've been talking about. Our biases can affect our behavior. Not all biases are negative. A bias can be a positive or negative, because a bias really speaks to a preference. Now, there have been studies done by Professor Carrell called the shooter bias test, and you can look at this test on the computer, and you can actually take the test. What it says is that when we look at individuals with sometimes ambiguous objects in their hand, and we're told to shoot if the object is a dangerous object like a gun or a knife, and not to shoot if it is a non-dangerous item like a cell phone or a can of soda, people are more quickly to shoot at the target if the target is African American and the object is ambiguous. These things are made in quick split-second decisions, and he tells us that bias can influence our actions. Now, people like police officers, of course, who have higher degrees of training, they perform much better on this test than do lay people. That doesn't mean that police officers are 100% accurate, or that lay people are really horrible at the test. But training does impact results. What else? Well, bias can affect how we view the quality of work that is submitted by a person. There is another test done by an author out of Denver called the Associate's Memo test, and that associate should have an apostrophe. But there's one who's allegedly a third-year associate graduate of NYU, working at a firm, who's delivering a memo to a partner. Now, there are two memos. One is attributed to an African-American third-year associate, the other to a white male third-year associate. The memos are exactly the same. They have the exact same errors, but the reviewing partners give the memo that is submitted by the putative African-American a much lower score than the one submitted by the white associate. The white associate gets something like a 4.8 on a 5-point scale. The African-American gets a 3.2. But the memos have the same spelling errors, the same grammatical errors, the same typos. The African-American gets much more negative comments, more errors are detected. The white associate, the reviewers say, well, he needs improvement, but he does show potential. So what accounts for that? You know, all of us look at things through the lens of our experience. And if we are expecting one to perform more poorly, we're likely to look more critically and find more errors than we would on the other. What about gender bias? Well, there are studies done, one called the orchestra study. Now it is not uncommon to see women in orchestras, but there was a time when that was not the case. In fact, there was a study done where musicians were allowed to audition behind a screen, and everyone wore tennis shoes so that you couldn't hear the click-clacking of heels. When you did this sort of blind audition, women fared much better because the reviewers, again, could not determine whether it was a woman or a man, and they were focused solely on the music. So that dissipated some of the bias that might otherwise have been present. There are other studies that have been done on whether or not people are likely to have more callbacks. People with Afrocentric names get fewer callbacks for job interviews than those with Eurocentric names, even when the information packet is the exact same and all people have to go on is the name. So that shows the presence of some measure of bias. Let's move to the next one, Jennifer. And these biases can be in race, class, or socioeconomics. There's a huge socioeconomic bias. When Paulette Brown, the first African-American female president of the American Bar Association, was in office, she flagged bias as a huge issue and committed to do something about it. She led an initiative to get a new model rule passed, Model Rule 8.4G, which, go to the next slide, Jennifer, which makes it misconduct for a lawyer to engage in conduct that the lawyer knows or should know is discriminatory on the basis of race, sex, religion, national origin, socioeconomic status, and or sexual orientation, and other items identified in the rule. Now, there's been a lot of controversy about that rule, but it is the model rule, and some states have and some states are adopting that. So I want to ask another polling question before I move into the last phase of the talk. Jennifer, put up the next polling question. And that question is, do you believe that biased people can change? Do you believe that people who hold biases, and I'm looking at primarily implicit biases, do you believe they can change? Answer quickly. And I'll count to 3 and then we'll close the poll. 1, 2, 3, close, Jennifer. Let's see what we have here. So 97% of you believe that people can change, and I believe that also. That is my hope, that as we learn, we can change. Next slide, Jennifer. Let's close out the poll. So go to the next slide. We've answered that one. Okay, so change is possible. How do we change? Well, I believe we change by, first of all, increasing awareness and knowledge about implicit bias and what the drivers are, increasing awareness about people who are different than we are. It's like my mother told me, she said, you know, don't fault people, and don't learn to minimize or hate people because they're different, because to them rather, you are different. All of us are different from the other people who are around us, but we all have more in common than we have that separate us. And we have to learn not only about bias, but learn about each other. So take the IAT, because the IAT can help us identify biases and can also help us mitigate those effects. Next slide, Jennifer. We need to expose ourselves to countertypical exemplars, and these will serve as debiasing agents. We need to expose ourselves if we have been working only with plaintiffs in discrimination suits. You might start to view people who are in those groups as harboring certain characteristics. Look for people who are also managers, people who are on the other sides of those suits. Look at people who are serving in management positions. Look at people who are serving in political positions. But don't just paint with a broad brush. Have sort of a big tent mentality and recognize the differences, and recognize that the characteristics that you see in one group, those characteristics are also held by populations of other groups. If you have not hired female law firms or female lawyers, in your law firm, and ask yourself why. Is it because you harbor certain views like, well, if I hire a female, she's going to need to spend time away from the office because of childcare responsibilities, or she's going to have to do this. I mean, ask yourself whether ideas like that are really keeping you from moving forward with those hiring decisions. Look at successful women lawyers who have made partner, who are really started their own law firms. All of the characteristics that you're looking at in women as reasons why you've not hired them, see how many of your male colleagues have those same things. If they're taking off because they have a family issue, or they're taking off because they have a charity event, are you inappropriately valuing one type of conduct disproportionately to another type of conduct? So do a self-audit and ask yourself why you are making those decisions and why you have not been able to achieve the diversity that you have verbally said that you wanted to achieve. I look at people who say, well, I really want to have a diverse force in my law office, but I can't find qualified applicants. Well, where are you looking for these applicants? You know, there are successful people who come from every law school in the country. And if you have it in your mind that, well, all of the really good lawyers come from X school and I haven't been able to get one from there, start looking at people who came from schools that are not, X school, who are successful, and maybe change the profile of who it is you want to hire. Go to the next slide, Jennifer. And we'll skip this one because we're not going to talk about police this afternoon. Go to the next slide, please. So also ask yourself, look around at your space and see if your mental imagery is somehow reinforcing your biases. If all of the images in your office, the images of people, are people who look like you, then I would say mix up that so that you're not just reinforcing a set of images or a set of biases that you have that keep you from moving beyond your own in-group. Try to connect with people across social groups and recognize the value that they bring through the difference that they bring in your office. And I will tell you another quick story. When I first became a judge in 1982, the clerk of court staffed my courtroom, and he was a middle-aged white male. His name was Gene Goldsby. He was a wonderful person. He was invested in my success, and he staffed my courtroom. When I opened court September 1 of 1982, he'd given me an all African-American court staff. I mean, everybody in the courtroom was African-American, including me, the judge. As I opened court that afternoon, the first person to come into the courtroom was a young white male. And he walked into the courtroom and looked around, and his eyes grew quite wide as he saw no one in there who looked like him. He came to the bench and asked for a continuance, which I granted. 30 days later, he came back with an African-American defense attorney. Now, that may have been the attorney that he was going to hire anyway, but I suspect he was concerned that he saw no one who looked like him and must have wondered whether or not he could reasonably expect to get justice in such a place. Well, I talked to Mr. Goldsby and said, you know, we need to bring in some diversity because people not only need to receive justice, they ought to perceive that they will get justice in the courtroom, and their race, their gender, their sexual orientation should have nothing to do with the outcome of that case, unless it is a case, of course, an employment case where somebody has made gender or sexual orientation or race a central component of that case. So we need to be careful about that. Go to the next slide, Jennifer. So there are some things that we can do. I was talking to the general counsel of a large company who told me that he has been, in trying to make certain that he negates some of his own biases, he's engaged in some blind screening. And that has been working well for him in some respects. That is hard to do, but it is worth trying if you can do it in your particular workplace. Commit to merit. Real objective criteria that you can look to, that you can measure across person and groups, so that you're really using a merit-based criteria to evaluate people, and that will diminish some of the biases that might otherwise surface. Focus on strategies that cause you to deny your own implicit biases and do self-audits. Ask yourself, you know, what you can do to negate those implicit preferences that you might hold for replicating yourself through people in your in-group. Go to the next slide, Jennifer, and we're going to do this. Monitor, evaluate your managers on meeting diversity goals and set realistic goals. Have layers of review for the evaluation of legal memos and partnership reviews. Engage in peer review. Encourage deliberate decision-making rather than snap judgments, because when we're making those snap judgments, that's where we have the greatest opportunity for bias to surface. If we can be reflective, then we can sometimes minimize our own biases. Next slide, Jennifer. And I'm going to finish up in about 5 minutes. I already said check your own biases. Go to the next one. And while we're going, our biases can have effect on what we remember. Keep in mind that memory is not a video camera recording with accuracy what happened. Our memory goes through our own filters, our own gender, racial, class filters. And there's been research by Dr. Craig Stark, who says that when we are trying to recreate memory, it's something like a Wikipedia page. We will remember more positive things about people who are more like us or people with whom we hold an affinity, and we will remember more negative things about people who are in our outgroups, the people with whom we do not have a connection. And that misremembering can have huge positive or negative outcomes on matters with which we are dealing. Next slide. This is something that I talk to judges about, because there's a huge opportunity for implicit biases to manifest when we're looking at Rule 12 motions, when we're deciding whether something is plausible. We are looking at those through our own filters, and sometimes that can impact whether or not a motion survives or dies right there. The same with summary judgment. That's a huge opportunity for our biases to be at work. Next slide, please. And that just sets forth the implicit bias and the 12B6 standards. So go to the next slide, Jennifer. In voir dire, this is one, and I'm going to end on this. I told you about the one case where people said they knew what a drug dealer looks like. In voir dire, we really have to do a better job at voir dire. And I know you would say to me, well, we would do that if judges would allow us to do voir dire. But whatever opportunity you get, if the judge doesn't allow you to do voir dire, we need to bring up some of these questions about bias. And the way we have done it before is through asking people to self-report. Do you hold any biases against this group or that group? And people say no. They're answering that question honestly, because at the head level, they may not know that they harbor a bias. So you've got to get at some other questions that allows people to really explore and think, and for those biases to manifest. If the judge does all of the voir dire, then you've got to come up with written questions and ask the judge to ask those questions so that you can get at it. If you might want to look at some of the research, some of the studies, and there's a lot of it out there, and do a memo for the judge on the importance of voir diring around implicit bias. Also, when you're doing that's and challenges, many times those are wrapped up tightly in our own stereotypes and our biases. We're making assumptions that because the plaintiff is a low-income individual, that plaintiff has less worth than her more affluent counterpart. Dr. Jennifer Eberhard from Stanford is getting ready to start studying right now damage awards and seeing what impact race and socioeconomic status has on damage amounts. And I think that's going to be some really exciting and eye-opening research. But we need to understand that in the work that we do day to day, our biases are oftentimes front and center. I'm gonna freeze on this frame right here and get ready to end because we are at 3 minutes after 4. If we're going to be leaders, and lawyers must be leaders, we have to lead the way in the elimination and the reduction of biases that negatively impact people's lives. These things are born of centuries, I should say years, and at least a century of deeply held stereotypes that we're projecting onto people. Brian Stevenson would say that we have to get proximate with these issues and proximate with people and become self-aware of the biases that we harbor and how our biases are impacting the people with whom we work and play, or whom we exclude and don't play with. But that has a real measurable effect on the lives of people. And many of us will say, you know, this is old. I'm tired of hearing about it. And we all may be tired of hearing about it, but we have not solved the problem. And until we come forward with a way to move some of the barriers by minimizing and diminishing implicit bias, then we must continue to work on it. Dr. King said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. I say that it doesn't bend of its own volition. It only bends when we take leadership roles in helping to push and pull the arc in the direction of justice. And if we're going to be leaders, and we have to be, that is going to be our task. Implicit bias is a huge barrier, as is explicit bias. And we must put our hands to the arc and bend it toward justice by eliminating the obstacle of bias. Thank you very much. And Jennifer, thank you for your help.
Thank you, Judge Donald, for your wonderful, powerful presentation. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Stevenson.
Thank you. We will now transition to a panel discussion featuring 5 lawyers from across the state who are in key positions in leadership within their organizations. Hi, and welcome to our panel discussion featuring top lawyers from across the state of Tennessee. They will talk to us today about their leadership roles in their organizations, as well as provide insight on issues like professionalism and diversity in the profession. Joining us today are Mark Baugh, shareholder and chair of the Diversity Committee at Baker Donaldson, Mary Beard, senior HR counsel at HCA and also TBA's first chief diversity officer, Brandon Gibson, chief operating officer for the state of Tennessee, Maria Gillen, senior manager litigation for Tennessee Valley Authority, and Gina Littrell, vice president legal and chair of the Diversity Council for FedEx Express US. Thank you all for being a part of this program. We really appreciate it. So let's get started. Dean Koch's letter to the Tennessee chapters of the American Inns of Court stated that lawyers have been the principal architects of our society and will continue to play leading roles in our collective quest for equal justice under the law. With that backdrop, I'd like to take some time for each of you to tell us a little bit about your roles within your organizations, including your primary responsibilities. So Mark, let's get started with you. Talk about what you do and your roles at Baker Donaldson.
I have been in charge of diversity and inclusion, thanks Jocelyn, since 2012. And since 2008, I should say, for 12 years. And it is pretty wide ranging. I manage the firm's diversity and inclusion effort. That includes the training, it includes portions of recruiting and retention. It's a management piece that's involved in compensation of shareholders and associates, and and as well as interfacing with clients on their diversity needs, clients that have diversity metrics that we have to meet. I have one and a half person assigned to do that, to assist me doing that full time. And then, I'm by training a labor and employment lawyer, and I still do that part of the time.
Great, thank you.
Thanks,
Mary,
Jocelyn.
thank you. Mary, what about you? Tell us about your role at HCA, and then also talk a little bit about your role with TBA now.
Sure. I am the senior HR counsel with HCA Healthcare in Nashville, Tennessee. I am, what would you say, the special counsel to the chief human resources officer and senior vice president and her executive staff. Her executive team covers areas of talent acquisition, compensation, benefits, employee engagement, employee relations, our operations and strategy. So I advise our HR executive team on all of those areas, as well in the area of labor and employment law, but I also handle many of their vendor contracts. And those vendor contracts could be for IT software, it could be for various hospitality and meetings that we have, it could be for training, it could be for executive coaches, but just a gamut across the board of handling those contracts for that HR executive team. In the world of TBA, as Jocelyn said, I am the first chief diversity officer, and I lead the statewide task force. And we have a number of excellent lawyers that are on that task force from across the state. It's quite diverse, from small firms to larger firms. We have different practice areas, solo practitioners, small firms, large firms, in-house counsel. We have individuals in all geographical areas of the state, Middle, West, and East Tennessee. And so I'm just excited to see what that task force can do regarding the diversity efforts across our state and the communities in which we serve. And so we are doing a very deep dive into the diversity initiatives that the TBA has today, as well as those in which we would like to implement over the next few years. And back to HCA, I also provide support to our Chief Diversity Officer, as well as our HR Executive Liaison to the diversity team.
Thank you very much. Brandon Gibson, Chief Operating Officer. I've known you as a judge for so long, and now you're in a different role. So please talk to us about what you're doing.
Yeah, so thanks for having me on the panel, first of all. But so my role, I've been Chief Operating Officer for the state since May of this year. There's nothing like coming into a role like this in the middle of a global pandemic. But I'm honored certainly to be here and to serve the citizens of the state of Tennessee in some small way. So the state has 23 distinct departments, all of which report up to the governor through my office. So my role varies from day to day. It looks very different based on what's happening on any particular day. And everything from fighting fires of what's going wrong right this minute to helping our departments improve efficiencies, to working with our Department of Human Resources on statewide initiatives, enterprise-wide initiatives, whether those are diversity initiatives or other types of employee health and wellness. And we are working very, very hard on making state government more efficient in the middle of an unprecedented time in our state's history. So my day looks like handling, a challenge with the Department of Health to working on really some far-ranging work that we're trying to do across the enterprise as a whole, to also making sure that we're doing the very best we can to care for the state's 40,000 employees. The state of Tennessee is the largest employer in the state, and we take it very seriously that our employees are healthy, happy, satisfied, and bring a lot of perspectives, unique and diverse perspectives to their work, which is what makes the state's work really helpful and fruitful to its citizens.
Thank you very much. I do want to talk a lot to all of you about how you've been coping with everything going on and how the pandemic has affected your role. So that's one of my questions for later, so I'm glad you brought that up. Maria, talk to me about your role at the Tennessee Valley Authority.
Sure. Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA, not to be confused with TBA. I went, wait, I don't know her. Why do I? So, TVA was formed in 1934. It's a by congressional act. It's a federal agency, and it was created to improve the life of the residents of the Tennessee Valley region. So we continue to do that and have done so since 1934. And hopefully I'll be able to tell you later, we have just, in addition to the things in our mission that we normally do, we've recently put a new emphasis on certain values, of which one is diversity and giving back to the community. So what I do often is not thought of as giving back to the community, but I am the manager of litigation. And we run the full gamut. We have employment litigation, we have contractual litigation, we have regulatory litigation, and many environmental cases. We have a huge workforce, so we have to defend them in all sorts of actions against them, car wrecks, that sort of thing. And we also continue to bring electricity to various parts of the Tennessee Valley region, which involves condemning certain tracts of land in order to construct transmission lines to bring electricity to various areas.
Thank you very much. And Gina, talk to us about what you are doing at FedEx.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm one of the vice presidents at FedEx Express, the original FedEx company, the airline, the absolutely positively overnight folks. And we're responsible for litigation, not only prosecuting occasionally, mostly defending, but also working with our partners outside legal to identify risk and develop and implement initiatives that can mitigate or eliminate risk. This summer, recently, I rotated into the chair position for our U.S. Express Vice President's Diversity Council. of which I had been a member for about 8 years. And that council provides support for our employee affinity groups, also provides direction for our diversity and equity and inclusion strategies in cooperation with the Enterprise Diversity Council and also with the Global Diversity Governing Board.
Thank you. Well, I meant to mention this earlier, but I know that some of you know each other and have worked together before. So if there's a question that I'm not asking or something that you know that might be a thing to ask, feel free to ask each other questions as well. Don't feel like you're just limited to what I'm asking you. And also, if there's another question that you think I should ask that's better, feel free to let me know that as well. So I do want to start with one question about public service. And most of my questions are going to be just anybody who wants to answer it, but there are a few that I'll start with a certain person. But public service and the legal profession generally, how has public service and service to this profession impacted the career decisions that you've made? And Brandon, I want to start with you because you've had unique positions in public service and different roles. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts about public service and that impact on your decisions?
Yeah, so let me go back a little ways. When I was practicing law in Jackson, Tennessee, represented some of the local communities, many county organizations, a few school boards across West Tennessee. And while I enjoyed having the opportunity to help solve problems, which is how I viewed my job, was to help solve problems, there was this gnawing part of me that really wanted to do something more. So in 2013, I applied for the Court of Appeals, and Governor Haslam appointed me. Really thought I would probably stay on the Court of Appeals for the rest of my career. And actually, Mary Beard was one of the council members on the Judicial Council back then. So it's great to kind of have this reconnection with her. But that work was also extraordinarily fulfilling, but it also was problem solving. You know, you were presented with a set of facts and certain laws, and your responsibility was to resolve that set of facts based on the law as it was at the time. And also that is problem solving, but it does problem solve in that the decisions you make carry on for years and years, but there was still this burning desire to try to help affect change on a bigger scale than what you can do in any one particular case. So that's really part of what drew me into state government where I am now. So for Governor Lee, I started as senior advisor, working primarily on criminal justice issues and on some of his rural initiatives, which really gives you an opportunity to help affect change on a broader scale. Public service, I think, is really important because it's that opportunity to really make an impact on the state as a whole. And really, there's nothing like it. I get up every day happy to come to work. No matter what challenge is facing me, I'm honored to be able to help solve problems for 6.8 million people. And every time there's a decision to be made, I have to ask myself, not what's best for Brandon Gibson, but what's best for the people of the state of Tennessee. And to be able to have that opportunity is just such an honor. But, you know, you hear service over self. And I think that's really important for all public servants to remember. It really is. I think maybe that's Rotary's, one of Rotary's lines, service over self. But it's true. You really have to stop and think what's best for the state as a whole, as opposed to what's best for you. And, you know, you're reminded every single day that we've got to do the right things for the right reasons. I think that goes for anybody who's in private practice as well. But in public service, you're always having to ask the question, are we doing the right thing for the right reason? And what can I do for Tennessee today? So anyway, that public service is fulfilling beyond what private practice was for me. And I highly recommend it.
Thank you very much. Anybody else want to talk about public service? You don't all have to answer each question, but I do want to give an opportunity if anybody else has anything to add. I thought that was great.
Well, you know, Joycelyn, you had also asked about service to the profession. And we really encourage lawyers here at FedEx to be active in professional organizations, take on leadership roles in professional organizations. And that's actually how I met Brandon many moons ago, was through the Federal Bar Association, which had a more active arm in Memphis, but actually covered Jackson too, which is my hometown. And so as president of the Mid-South chapter of the Federal Bar Association, that's one of the things that I really wanted to do, is bring that those two arms together. And we did that by having events in Jackson and in Memphis, which they still do. And so for me, it was about developing leadership skills, but also growing a network of professional relationships, both, you know, within the legal profession and beyond, within my area of practice and beyond, so that I could learn from people who had experience at all levels in all different areas, and I could bring that back and apply it. And I've watched people who have taken on roles in professional organizations, community service organizations, grow beyond what they ever would have been had they just stuck to the work on their desk.
And so, Mark, I'll ask you this question. I was in private practice for 16 years in law firms. I think you're the only law firm person represented on our panel. Talk to me about, I guess, what's going on in law firms now, and as new associates are coming in, has it changed as far as the service and opportunities, or even encouragement to associates, and kind of what's Baker doing?
At Baker, you know, pro bono is very important. We allocate 50 hours of billable time for pro bono and 50 hours of billable time for public service work to each attorney every year. And so we encourage attorneys to be active in pro bono and public service work. We also have a shareholder who is solely dedicated to pro bono. We're now in our second person who does that full time. The first person, Lisa Borden, that did it full time. You know, she was so passionate about it that she ended up leaving the practice of law and taking and going back to school in, I think, Switzerland to do a course in human rights, or a study in human rights. And our current pro bono shareholder, Sam Bowman, you know, his job is to source and vet all our pro bono activities firm-wide and to encourage attorneys to engage in pro bono. So we're active in the health clinic in Nashville, and we're active in the health clinic in other places. And, you know, for me, you know, even this summer, I took on a nationwide project from a organization that advocates for homeless children, particularly homeless LGBTQ children. And we did a firm-wide survey that kind of catalogs all the case law that makes LGBTQ teenagers in particular homeless. You know, things that force them out of the house, and things that then in turn not let them have access to different services, and how you then categorize them and moving them easily from teenagers into adulthood. So, you know, for us at Baker, pro bono is really, I mean, it's really an important facet of encouraging young attorneys to be active in the community.
Great, thank you very much. So Dean Koch's letter referenced the important role of lawyers in equal justice. And so I wanted to get some of you to talk about ways in which you or the organizations that you serve have addressed equal justice needs and concerns in the larger community. Maria, I know that there's some initiatives at the Tennessee Valley Authority that are going on right now. Talk about those.
I was going to tee off of the young attorneys coming in, because they're really the ones in our office who push for this, to do something similar to what the private firms do, and that I remember the private firms in New York City doing when I worked there. So yeah, we have started a huge pro bono effort that involves the whole office. We work consistently on ABA free legal answers, which is a function of being quarantined, but you can help a lot of people through this online platform. And I think pretty much the entire office has become involved in it. And we have a whole pro bono program that, again, allows, we have a lot of government ethics issues to deal with, but we negotiated to get time that the lawyers can spend that they are otherwise working for TVA to get some hours for pro bono. And we just received, I don't want to have it wrong, so I wrote it down. We just received an award, a Champion of Justice Award from the Memphis Bar Association, Access to Justice Committee, for those efforts. So we did an expungement clinic, and I think tomorrow is a domestic violence clinic. So that's been great. And everybody's really, people who don't litigate for their job do these things. So it's wonderful.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's great. Mary, let me ask you this question. Do you think that lawyers play a unique role when it comes to raising awareness and implementing strategies related to equity or access to justice? And if so, how?
I do. I think that we play a role in that we are servants. I call myself a legal servant. I think lawyers are legal servants to the community. I think we do play an important role, and we can play that role in many ways. We can play that role through bar association affiliations. I am former president of the Ben F. Jones chapter in Nashville, Ben F. Jones chapter, the National Bar Association in Memphis. I'm currently the president of the Napier-Luby Bar Association here in Nashville. And so it is just through those organizations that we have many equal justice initiatives that we've had. And we also partner with other organizations to ensure equal justice. But I think it's a part of a lawyer's DNA for service. And so if we as lawyers are not there to ensure justice, who would be? And so I think that, you know, whatever the law is and whatever the law states, we as lawyers are the ones who advocate for that law, advocate for the justice to be had based upon the law at the time that we're dealing with. But I think that is very, it gives us some reward in our profession. Well, it has given me reward in my profession to assist others who have felt that they have been victims of injustice in our society.
Thank you very much. Anybody else have anything to add to that as far as just lawyers and the unique role that we play?
I just have a little, a couple of years ago when it was Easter, but it was Lent. And so I was looking for what could I do, something affirmative to do prior to Easter. And I was asking my friend, well, maybe I'll go to work at the soup kitchen. And she practically smacked me in the head. And she said, Maria, you're an attorney. You have skills that people need. You need to do legal aid. You need to help people who can't hire a lawyer. And I took her up on that, and it was the best decision. So we have skills that people really, really need, and we need to share them with those people, is what I think.
You know, Justin, I'll say on that is, you know, as the attorneys that I guess that I feel like I'm standing on their shoulders that are in the bar, you know, and that, you know, heavily influenced me since I've been in the bar. Some of them are deceased. all did public service work, or all were people who made their communities better. And so I just always feel like that's a part of being a lawyer, is, to make your community better, to be active in the community in somehow. And, I think as Maria said, is you have a law degree, and, and helping to change in some small way your community is something that I always understood to be a part of why we become lawyers, even if you're a transactional lawyer. And particularly for somebody of color, I just think it's really important for me to be involved in some small way in my community.
And there are just so many opportunities that require so little of our time. The Saturday legal clinic at the law library, you don't have to have any special knowledge. You're not required to enter into any sort of a long-term commitment. The Tennessee Board of Professional Responsibilities has made the ethics rules easy to support that type of very minimum representation. And often people are just bringing in mail that is not written in a way that regular people can understand it. And it's just interpreting, a letter about a student loan. You don't have to have special knowledge, and you can pick and choose, which people you speak with. And there's always people who are experts there to help if you get stuck. So it really can be as simple as a half-a-day commitment.
Thank you very much. Well, Gina, since you were the last person to speak on that one, I'll start with you on the next one. So diversity and inclusion, I know that's a part of your role, and something that's very important. I know many people are talking about these days. What types of initiatives have you or your organization taken to increase awareness related to diversity and inclusion, and to make a substantial impact on the profession? And so, Gina, I know that you have a sort of a small presentation that you want to show before you talk, so I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I do have the distinct joy to work for a global organization that has the resources and resolve to make a difference throughout the community in this space. And rather than me try to give it justice, I did bring a quick little 2-minute video that'll give you just a little bit of our story with regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the community.
Thank you.
I mean, this has been true throughout my 20+ years as in-house counsel, and the several years that I've worked for FedEx as outside counsel before that. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is absolutely part of the FedEx DNA. And from the commitment and communications of our executive leadership through how we source with vendors, the empowering community organizations we support, developing for our pipeline, recruiting, developing leaders within the company. I mean, it really is just a circle of investment and intentional attention focused on ensuring that we have equal opportunity, equity in our employment and in our sponsorship, and just, you know, throughout the communities we serve.
Thank you. I can tell why you didn't get to the video was a lot of information in there you all are doing. It's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
I mean,
sorry.
it barely scratches the surface.
Wow.
I'll just spend 30 minutes on just the exciting things that we're doing throughout the enterprise.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, when people say, well, you just can't find women lawyers in this particular practice area, or you can't find minority lawyers in this particular practice area, I always respond with, where are you looking? Because, you know, we have not had a problem in finding well qualified women and minority lawyers to recruit. So where are you looking? Where are you going to interview for your internship programs? Are you taking advantage of the externship programs? Many law schools are now requiring students to complete some sort of externship for course credit before graduating. So that's the compensation. It is free to you, other than providing an enriching educational opportunity. And you know, are you taking advantage of that to show women and minority lawyers that you are a welcoming and inclusive environment, so that as they're progressing through their career, they're always thinking, you know, that you're a place they want to come?
Well, I've been given the note that we have.
And not to hog this subject, Joycelyn, but I do think I would like to say something about my own company now.
Yeah.
So I am employed by ACA.
Please do.
Just a little tidbit about what we do in diversity. I think is amazing. But I think our diversity touches a little bit more than just our employees, because our mission statement at ACA is to the care and improvement of human life. And that goes to our diversity and inclusion, not only for our employees, but also to our patients that we serve across the United States and in the United Kingdom. But our diversity hits not only our colleagues as employees, but also our boards, the communities in which we serve. And so it's just a gamut of things that we do from internally, but externally, that we support the diversity, inclusion, and equity of care for our number of facilities that we have across the U.S.
Thank you very much.
And Joycelyn, before you pull the plug, because I think you're about to say we're almost out of time, so I do want to make sure I talk just a little bit. I'm going to kind of draft off of Mary Beard here and talk a little bit about the state. You know, obviously Tennesseans look different, and we serve all Tennesseans, and so it's important for the people who are doing the service to Tennesseans that look a lot different, that our workforce also looks different. So we work really hard on recruiting and on retention, and have a renewed focus on that. We kind of have 23 different businesses that are kind of all operating a little bit independently under a large umbrella, but really have found that the use of diversity and equity councils within the departments is very helpful, just for shared dialogue and exchange of information. But one of the things I want to really highlight is that in 2011, which was a couple of governors ago, the state of Tennessee, I guess it was one governor ago, the state of Tennessee started governor's office of diverse business enterprise. And in 2011, the annual state spend on diverse businesses through our government procurement and contracting was about $185 million. Since that time, the growth has been unbelievable. Our state has really worked to help develop minority, female, and veteran-owned businesses so that they're able to do business with the state of Tennessee. And in fiscal year 2018, our spend, remember, it was 185 million in 2011. In 2018, it was $530 million of spend in these diverse business enterprises. So I think while you have to, as Mary and Gina both have said, you have to focus on your workforce. You also have a real opportunity as larger employers and larger businesses to really push that out to the economy as a whole and help those diverse businesses develop and do business on a bigger scale. So we're happy to be engaged in that work.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Maria or Mark, I want to give you the chance as well. If you have anything else you want to add to that.
I just wanted to underline what people were saying. It has to be a concerted effort to recruit and retain a diverse workforce of all types of diversity. And that is a very important thing for our general counsel, Sherry Quirk. And when we look for outside counsel, that's a part of the metric that we look at. How diverse is their workforce working for us? And the same thing with our intern and recruitment pipeline it's a high priority. So it's not going to happen without concerted effort.
Okay. Any other final comments? I know that one of the things that we will be doing is creating a page with resources. So to the extent that you all have any resources, books, or other materials related to your roles or your organizations that you think we should include and people would be interested in, let us know, and we'll make sure it's distributed with everybody else. Well, I had a lot more questions, but in the interest of time and the fact that we only have a small panel, I have to, I think, end in talking about the current pandemic. And I sent you all this question beforehand, so you know I was going to ask it. And it's, how has the global pandemic affected your role and your organization's priorities? And I'm sure it has in different ways. If you don't want to answer that one, do you have any advice on how we navigate the next 6 to 12 months and any best practices that you all are, as leaders, implementing to make that a little bit easier? Brandon, I'll start with you.
Great. Let's go first here. So obviously it has impacted state operations quite a lot. But I really want to focus on the second part of the question, which is advice on how to navigate the next 6 to 12 months. It's real easy to write 2020 off as a lost year. I know many people are excited for 2021 to roll around. Frankly, I've already got my Christmas tree up. And note, this is being recorded in October, so I already have my Christmas tree up because I am ready for Christmas. But we are doing ourselves and our companies and our fellow citizens a disservice if we fail to recognize that 2020 has brought tons of gifts to us. And we have to recognize what those gifts are and capitalize on them. We've learned that we can do a lot of things by video conference. It might not be exactly the same, but it's a pretty good substitute. We learned that we can work in a lot of different places and still be effective and get the work done. The disruption has brought plenty of opportunities, and I think especially leaders in our state and especially in the profession have to be careful not to go back to the way things were pre-COVID, but to take what we've learned in this period of time and really make sure we amplify it for the next generation, for the next 10 years for sure. So that's my advice to people, is to not write it off, to really spend some time between now and the end of the year reflecting on the things you've learned and the ways you can apply those things once life eventually returns to some more semblance of normal. And then the last thing I'd say is that pack your grace and patience, because grace and patience has been the only thing that's gotten me through the last 9 months. And I think it's really important to extend to others, because everybody's in this boat together, and grace and patience will get us through. And my lights just went off.
Not our fault, I promise.
I haven't moved since I've been on here, so the automatic lights just went off. My apologies.
No worries at all. Thank you. Good advice. Anyone else? What are you all doing, or any advice on how, as leaders, we can help each other and our organizations navigate the next year?
I just want to say that I underline Brandon's. I think we just have to give a lot of grace to ourselves and to each other. And fortunately, people continue to need electricity, perhaps more. So we're good, TVA, and we're so good that we passed it on to what we call our customers, which are the local power companies, who then passed it on to their customers. So that was a real good thing that happened out of this, as was the pro bono effort, because frankly, I think people were looking for something. They had more time. They had more time to do stuff because they didn't have to go into the office and come back and all of that. So there was much more participation on the online pro bono stuff. So that was good. And I just, parting shot from me is civility. I mean, there was a question that was given to us earlier about what can lawyers do? And I think we can just be civil and provide an example of civility, because it's a little bit in short supply these days and nerves are frayed. So be kind to ourselves and others.
Thank you. Gina, what about you?
So yes, we can do a lot through Zoom, and we can litigate remotely, which I probably would not have thought possible 8 months ago. But I miss people, and I think people need in-person interaction. And I think we also need to be aware that while we're doing everything virtual, including conferences and conventions and fundraisers, there are communities that need help, lots of help. And those of us, still employed gainfully, have the resources to help. So, as we move forward, many people are hungry and unemployed and need assistance that we have the time and the resources to provide. So, I would look for ways to safely support members of our community who have not fared as well as we have.
Thank you very much. Mary?
I think that what I would say we should do in the next 6 to 12 months is be resilient. Develop coping skills to manage the setbacks we've seen. Develop those coping skills to help us with challenges. And let's do so with a positive and constructive attitude. Because as we go through the next 6 to 12 months, we don't know what we're going to face. We know that this year of 2020, as Brandon said, has brought us many things we didn't know we could do. But it also has brought us setback and challenges, as Gina spoke about, in many people in our communities, that it has negatively affected their lives. But as the Chief Diversity Officer of the TVA and as a healthcare attorney, I will tell you that we do have challenges to meet as we go forward. We have healthcare challenges, we have social justice challenges, we have a lot of challenges, but we need to face those and be resilient about it as we move forward. And what I will say, as you will see across the board in healthcare companies, that you should wash your hands, maintain social distancing, and wear a mask. So for the next 6 to 12 months, please do that if you don't do anything else to protect yourself and others, because we are living in a pandemic right now. So if you don't remember anything from our discussion today, wash your hands, wear your mask, practice social distancing. Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you very much, Mary. Hey, Mark.
So Jocelyn, I would say that, to kind of I guess my takeaway from 2020 is this, is we're in a pandemic. Brandon is right, Mary is right. I hesitate to say whether it's a gift, but what I can say is this, is some of the activity and the activism that particularly came from younger people this year surrounding George Floyd and Breonna Taylor's death. I think the fact that some college-age students and some high school students who are not in school led them to actually participate in a defining moment in history for them. And I think it has also led to a lot of education for a new generation on the sacrifices that others made for them. And I think there are a lot more people this year who are, for a variety of reasons, who are participating in our democracy. And those are very important takeaways for 2020 for me when I see my nephew register to vote for the first time at 20. So, I think those are very important things that I'm not sure if some of the challenges of 2020 brought to us, that whether they're millennials or Generation Z, would not have been as active in our democracy and fighting for their own future as we have now.
Thank you very much. Well, this has been a great panel. I know it's a little bit longer but I think it's important, and it's long for a reason, because you all have such great experience and have a variety of leadership roles, and done such great work in your own organizations, but also in the community. And I personally thank you and admire all the work that you're doing. And obviously, to the extent TBA can be of any collaborative help in some of the work that you're doing, particularly with mentoring and helping the communities, please let us know. But with that, if there's nothing further, I will conclude this panel, and thank you all again for being here. Thank you.